Good morning, everyone. I mean, good afternoon, everyone. I'm still in the Hello, how are you all doing today? So, we wanted to make sure that you have your evaluation forms before we get started. So if you don't, just grab them from the back and you can come up here to get one. But we have three fabulous speakers here today to speak about tracking progress for restoration practices. And our speakers are Liz Chudoba and Maya Stirot and Jake Raleigh. And I just want you all to give them a round of applause. Well, we will today. Take it away. Give a little.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to kick us off here. So for those that don't know me, and not everyone knows me, so I'm Jake Riley again. I'm the director of Chesapeake programs for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Liz asked me to kind of kick us off here in the session and sort of a little bit of like what we're doing here, what Liz is going to be talking about, why. Again, for those that were here this morning, heard me say that like NFWF is in the business of supporting on the ground conservation and restoration. And so there is strategy behind that. Like we're not just haphazard. We have specific goals and outcomes because for a variety of reasons, but not least of which is because a lot of our funding actually comes from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and we work in close partnership with the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. A lot of our own goals that we've sort of structured for our own programs are really kind of tied to the shared sort of goals and outcomes of the Chesapeake Bay Partnership, right? So I provide that leading into sort of what some of NFWF's relevant goals, right, that we have for our programs, and I'll make the connection. You'll get me in a second. But as part of our Chesapeake Bay business plan, which is our business plan, which sort of our strategic sort of plans for major landscape programs, we have explicit goals for riparian forest buffer restoration and stream health improvement. Really important. So we have a goal. We set a goal for ourselves and sort of through our grants programs and our grantees to implement 1,000 miles of riparian forest buffer between 2012 and 2025. We also set for ourselves a goal to improve stream health for 1,500 miles across the watershed. That's fine and all well and good on paper. But really probably about 2018 at the last time we sort of took a look at our progress and really kind of sort of an internal sort of check-in on the business plan. I think we recognized that certainly we were getting a lot of good data and information from our grantees on implementation outcomes, right? So acres of buffers, miles of livestock exclusion, right? Those are really easy things, relatively easy things to measure. We were not doing anything consistently, quite honestly, around this goal for stream health, right? I think sort of implied in sort of our own strategic sort of, prioritization process, we were sort of making the connection between, riparian practices, so restoration practices in and along the stream corridor, livestock exclusion, buffers, stream restoration, and stream health improvements. Right, so that if we were putting these practices in and along stream corridors, we could reasonably expect to see improvements in stream health. So it was sort of a tacit connection that we sort of made in our strategic planning process, but that's really sort of where it ended. And so very quickly for me, as sort of the manager of this portfolio and knowing that ultimately I'd be accountable to our board of directors now next year in 2025, a little bit of an oh shit kind of recognition of like, okay, well, like we're not doing what we need to do to be able to set up the mechanism to really kind of understand and make these connections. And so at the time, and I can't even remember, Liz, exactly how this, I don't know whether like I approached you or you approached me or just kind of was happenstance, but one of the stories here was that I was aware of work that Liz and the Alliance were doing through this Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative, really to sort of help support expanded capacity on the landscape to monitor aquatic resources, right? And there's a whole story with CMC and sort of the origin of their work and that kind of thing. But really from our perspective, I sort of came at this of recognizing we have a need in terms of significantly scaling monitoring in and along, sort of associated with all of these restoration projects that we're funding, right? Very specifically for us to connect the restoration work with these improvements in stream health. So part of this is like, all right, how are we gonna get that done? a recognition of the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative as sort of a well-established, well-oiled partnership that's supporting aquatic resource monitoring in the region. So I think probably it was like, I sort of approached Liz, was like, hey, like, what do you think about this? We have this need, like, is this something that you can help us with? So that really sort of kicked off the process. You'll hear all about it, but really sort of why NFWF is invested here and sort of what we're trying to get at is really being able to understand, characterize, track, and communicate the actual ecological improvements that we're seeing from the restoration work that we're doing, right? Like I see heads nodding, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's not easy. There's all types of reasons it doesn't happen. But you know, what we've been fortunate to be able to sort of do with Liz and her team is really sort of build out a very robust protocol for really sort of, again, not just kind of, there's all different sort of reasons and approaches to monitoring. We're not just necessarily looking at like tracking conditions. We're really trying to make a connection between restoration actions and investments and changes, right? So that even in and of itself sort of requires sort of a intentional sort of approach there. But what we've done and sort of where we're at is really sort of built a pretty robust protocol for being able to sort of characterize a number of different sort of important indicators around things like stream health in the very defined way that the Chesapeake Bay program talks about it in terms of benthics and IBIs, but also stream and riparian habitat condition, right? So where we're at is we've built out this protocol. Liz and her team, and I'm probably stealing a little bit of her thunder here, but really sort of build out this protocol and really starting to sort of, you know, get monitoring going on these projects on the ground. So we are still very much, just being candid, in a very early sort of piloting stage of really sort of getting this out there. We are doing it just for our own internal needs, but I think there is a tremendous amount of potential in terms of what we've been building with Liz and the team as sort of a tool and a mechanism for any number of partners to sort of incorporate and integrate into their own work. Just last like little connection or point I would make is that, you know, I was just in, or for a little bit, some folks might have been, there was a session, I think in that building, on stream delisting, right? As an example of a thing that's happening where local partners are very explicitly doing watershed restoration work for the purposes of actually pulling dirty streams off the 303 lists. Like, it's a very discrete regulatory action that complementary to, but totally separate from this big old Chesapeake Bay TMDL we talked about, right? That is just one very specific, and Liz would counter, like, that's not quite what we're doing here. And that's, so I need to be clear, we are not doing data collection directly to support delisting, but I provide that as like an example of an anecdote that better understanding and characterization of the resource, and specifically how restoration is helping us sort of move that resource along, is really powerful, including all the way to and through like regulatory processes, right? So we're talking about tracking this and really kind of characterizing this for our own goals, but I view this kind of work as a, again, sort of a very like instrumental, fundamental capacity that we just collectively need to build, right, across the partnership. So I'll stop and I'll let Liz sort of talk a little bit about this and maybe a pitch to Liz and her team for you. So.
Thanks so much, Jake. That was really great just to have context and the connection to NFWF, because this whole process was built for and with NFWF support. So again, I'm Liz Chudoba. I'm with Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. I'm the Water Quality Monitoring Initiative Director. And Maya is also here. She's our Water Quality Monitoring Projects Coordinator. So she'll be going into a little bit more of the details later in the presentation about the actual on the ground, what we're doing, how we're monitoring, all of that. I'm going to give a little bit more in-depth background on how we got started, why we made some of the decisions we made, and all of that. So as Jake mentioned, this started a couple of years ago. I think in 2021, we actually started the conversation somewhere around that. Again, we have a wonderful network, the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative, CMC. Some of you may be familiar with that. There's over 100 organizations that work with community-based monitoring programs across the watershed, and CMC really works to leverage that network and integrate that data into the Chesapeake Bay program partnership. So we have a lot of robust structures in place for data collection, specifically water quality and benthic macroinvertebrate data collection. So in partnering with NFWF, we were kind of thinking about using this structure, working within the organizations of community monitors who are already out there on the ground, engaged in this work, to pull together this protocol. So we have 5 organizations within the CMC that act as the core development team: the Alliance, ALARM, the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, ALARM, and the Isaac Walton League of America are 3 of those organizations who are also working on this project. And we also brought in Stroud Water Research Center as a partner. They are the leading experts in restoration monitoring work, in tracking the ecological effects of this restoration work on the landscape. So to get started, this is a big task. We really wanted to make sure that we laid the groundwork, we identified the goals, we identified the questions we wanted to answer, and really connected the indicators that we were tracking to those questions. So the first couple of years of the project, we're really doing a lot of background work. We did background research to identify the specific water quality impacts of restoration practices. So we looked at a bunch of, as many of us know, there are hundreds of practices that can go in the ground. Not all of them have direct water quality impacts. So we were really, the first step was really to look at all of the different practices, see what those impacts might be, and which practices we might start to see impacts sooner, you know, within that 5 to 10 year post-restoration timeframe instead of longer timeframes. So the first step was we narrowed down the practices that we are looking at to cattle fencing along with forest buffers and stream restoration projects. So really trying to focus this project on those in-stream practices, riparian zone practices that are having those direct impacts to the waterway. The second step was to conduct stakeholder meetings and surveys. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We didn't want to do something that everybody was already doing and then get down the road and have everybody go, yeah, we already are doing that. So we put out surveys to our monitoring networks, the NFWF networks, and really tried to engage stakeholders that we knew were in this field. And the interesting thing that kind of came out of this was that everybody really is interested in monitoring. It's an important thing. We really need to know what the impacts are that we're having on these local waterways. But there really wasn't common themes in indicators, timing, frequencies, methodologies that were being used across the watershed to track these changes. So it just really became apparent that it is a really big need to have a consistent protocol that we can monitor in any state across the watershed and collect consistent data sets on consistent timeframes. A lot of this is also tied to funding and grant limitations. We all know that if you have a 3-year grant, it's really hard to monitor beyond those 3 years of a project. And as I said, a lot of these we're looking at the impacts from about 5 to 10 years post-restoration. So that was really informative to understand that there isn't really common methods. There were some commonalities, and we did pull from kind of the top indicators that people are monitoring, top interests that people are interested in, and things like that. So all of those 2 pieces then went into, helped us inform our study design process. And a study design process is really just a way to create a monitoring plan to identify your questions and then identify the water quality indicators that you need to monitor to answer those questions. So we went through that for about a year. It took us about a year to kind of workshop, identify the questions that we wanted to answer, and then come up with the protocol that we were going to put together. So through the study design process, we kind of identified 4 questions. The first 2 are 4 goals. The first 2 are top priority goals. The first one is to assess the status of an intervention pre and post restoration. So we don't have control sites. We're not comparing a site against some other external site. The goal of this project is to compare one site pre-restoration to the data post-restoration at that site. The second part of this, or the second main goal, is to develop case studies and really tell stories about these local impacts. A lot of the conversation is obviously on the Bay TMDL and how we're meeting those Bay TMDL credits. But we really want to make sure that we're also telling the stories of the impacts to the local waterway, to the farmer, and that kind of stuff. The secondary goals are to alert project managers to potential issues. We'll just have additional eyes and ears on the ground, which never hurts with restoration practices, to have people out there on the ground identifying any concerns or issues that arise. And then last, but certainly not least, and really our bread and butter, is that community engagement and education. We built this protocol to involve volunteers in the data collection, and it's also really important to get the community involved and make sure they understand the importance of these practices, the importance of restoration on our landscape. So once we went through all of that and we had our goals and we knew what parameters we wanted to monitor to meet those goals, we then developed the actual protocol. And for the physical parameters, we're monitoring water temperature and water clarity. And we're also monitoring benthic macroinvertebrates. Those methodologies were all leveraged using the CMC methodology that we had worked really hard for the last 9 years to put together. And then we actually created a new visual and physical assessment. We worked with the stream visual assessment protocol, which kind of gauges different areas of stream banks, erosion, and things like that, but it's a very kind of subjective, if you want to say, assessment tool. And so we worked really hard, and I say we collectively, it was really Alarm and Stroud who worked really hard to kind of convert that protocol to actual tangible measurements, taking a stream bank angle, looking at the substrate, actually classifying the substrate, looking at different substrate sizes. And Maya will go into more detail in a little bit about all of the things that we assess through that process. Everybody's favorite topic, we also have an EPA approved QOP. And the really important thing with this is that we want to engage NFWF grantees in this process. And we wrote this QOP so that individual organizations who are participating in this monitoring program do not have to write an individual QOP. This is an umbrella QOP, and as long as they're following this protocol exactly, it covers everybody involved.
What's a QOP?
Oh, that is a great. That's a whole other TED Talk. It's a quality assurance project plan. So in the monitoring world, it's all of the pieces that make sure that the quality of the data is what it should be. And then lastly, we developed a Survey 123 application to store and manage this data. For anybody familiar with the CMC, we do have the the CMC Data Explorer, and we chose not to put this data into that very public-facing platform because it is linked to individual farms, and we want to be sensitive about who that information is shared with. So we do plan on sharing the information, but we want to make sure that we share the synthesized data and not the raw data that could potentially be used in manners that it's not, that we don't intend it to be used for. So we are storing everything in Survey 123 as kind of that data management piece.
Was the visual and the physical assessment all done like what individuals, like looking at the pictures, or did you do any machine learning with it?
Do you mean how it was developed or
Yeah.
what we're doing in the fields?
Yes. I guess what I mean is like, it's like if you're taking a bunch of pictures and examining the photos, like there you could train a model to sort of identify like those kind of things, or maybe you're not doing that. And I guess my question was, are you doing that?
We are not doing machine learning at this point in time. Specifically for the standardized photos that go along with the visual physical assessment. So the visual physical assessment is actual like measurements that are being taken in the field. We are taking standardized photos that we could, in theory, engage with machine learning down the road. But no, that is not actively part of this process. All right, so as Jake mentioned, we've been kind of piloting this project over the past couple of years, and we currently have 9 sites that we're actively monitoring. 6 are in Pennsylvania, 1 is in Maryland, and 2 are in Virginia. So moving forward, what we're really looking for is to onboard additional sites next spring with NFWF grant funded projects. So as Maya will kind of take over and talk about the actual methodology and our onboarding process for NFWF grantees, the goal is for us to onboard 5 to 10 additional sites annually moving forward from the applicant pool of NFWF grantees. So with that, does anybody have any other questions about like the background before Maya hops into?
So can other organizations do this monitoring and receive and apply for NFWF?
Yeah, sure.
So it's a very good question. So I think, so what we have built, right, is we built it focused on monitoring of like funded projects, right? So like it was after we've made a decision to fund, how can we basically then layer on, kind of separately from the grant and separately from the budget and those kinds of things, layer on, right, the kind of monitoring that we're looking for, right? To your question though, I think I don't know if I thought about it this way necessarily when we started, but what we've developed is an entirely replicable protocol, right? Whether it is Liz and the CMC partnership actually doing it, or another trained organization, and Liz might get into this, but there is training as a component of this, right? So I would say that like right now it's a little bit of a we don't have a solid answer of exactly how we want this to look, right? But I think the point here that I think we want to make is, number one, and we've already done this with some of our sort of biggest implementing grantees, is we're doing the outreach of those funded projects to say, hey, listen, there's this thing that we'd love for you to opt into if you want to. We're paying Liz and her team to go do it, but basically what we need from you all as grantees is access to the site, contact with the landowner, all those kinds of things, right? Over time, I think for sure a perfectly great outcome of this would be that it is a protocol and it is a monitoring approach that more and more grantees are taking up themselves. Again, and that could be in part with NFWF funding to do, right? Both for our own purposes at NFWF in terms of getting information and characterizing it, but ultimately, hopefully, like more than that even, it is providing individual organizations and partnerships like tangible, valuable data for their own purposes, whether it's tracking or public outreach or whatever, right? So long answer to your question, which is just like, I think what you'll start to see, this is a reminder for Tori too, what you'll start to see from us is, I think we're gonna try to better communicate the existence of this partnership and of this protocol in like our annual request for proposals, so that we are basically, at the very least, acknowledging and letting folks know that this thing exists, that like it is a reasonable component of a potential project to do, right? To like build into your budget, those kinds of things. We also get into this challenge though, that Liz already pointed out, that in general, NFWF just doesn't provide just grants for monitoring, right? It tends to be somewhat incidental to the actual restoration work, or sort of on top of that. Moreover, that they built a protocol that ultimately has a 5 to 10 year time horizon, right? So with a 2 to 3 year grant, maybe you're getting some funding from us to kind of do the pre-restoration stuff, but like that's where it's naturally going to stop, right? So there's limitations that kind of we're trying to think through, but It's a perfectly reasonable question. I think just something that we're thinking
It's
through.
just you're losing out on a huge resource. The funding keeps going to these groups that aren't in the watersheds. And when you have established groups that do quality, water quality monitoring, and you're not supporting us, and you're not allowing us to do this work.
Here,
I mean, this is a problem.
Why? I did not expect this, which is fine. That is not problematic. I acknowledge that because I don't want to take Liz off of this, but I think the reality is we built this because NFWF has very discrete monitoring needs, right? So first and foremost, this is about getting data that we need for ourselves, right? And maybe my jump to connect to hopefully providing value to your organizations is what is rubbing you a little bit because you're already doing that work, right? But ultimately where this started is we need data, we need consistent data, we need it done in a certain way. And that's not to discount or discredit the work that is already happening out there. I just know that there is not that level of consistency, right? That we couldn't use it in the same way across our portfolio of projects, right? Across the geography. So it's a perfectly robust discussion. And I welcome sort of following up on this and unpacking a little bit, because I think there was no intent in us doing this that we would make those already doing monitoring on the landscape that we're not paying for feel devalued, feel like we were giving money to the Alliance for the Bay and not your organization. Also, as Liz can talk, like part of this whole thing is that it is built and designed to be able to enable anyone, any kind of organization to participate in this and to get money to do it, right, for your own work, right? So that was very much sort of intended in terms of this volunteer monitoring, right? This isn't just paying the Alliance to go out there and do monitoring. This is building a protocol that lots of different organizations and interests can buy into, and maybe even use as a supplement to the existing monitoring work that you're already doing and already paying for, right?
Yeah, and we'll definitely go through that when we hit some of the later slides.
Great points. Oops, I definitely. Sorry. All right, I will turn it over to Maya to kind of walk through all the different components. We're also happy to stay afterwards and we can continue to talk about either project development or continue these conversations.
Alrighty, so how are we doing this monitoring? This thing we've been talking about for half an hour. So yes, that is correct. All right. So as Liz said before, we have 4 different sort of components of monitoring. We have sort of a baseline water quality measurements we're taking. So air temperature, water clarity. We'll go into all of these more in depth in a second. The visual physical assessment, this will take a majority of the monitoring time and effort. So that is stream geometry, that is looking through stream viewers and assessing the, what's in the stream bed, classifying it. We look up above and see what's the canopy cover. We're also looking at the riparian zone alongside the stream to see, all right, how are the trees doing? Are there any trees? Are they dead? And then we have a smaller biological habitat sort of checklist survey. We take standardized stream reach photos that we cannot train AI yet for, but maybe one day. We also have basic macroinvertebrates that we send to a lab to identify to the family level. So again, a little more in depth. So air and water temperature, super easy. We don't want to fiddle around with really expensive equipment that is a barrier to a lot of folks that don't have the budget for bigger sort of monitoring tools. So hand thermometer, super cheap and easy to get. That's where we take air and water temperature. We take water temperature twice, once at the beginning and once at the end. We have a transparency turbidity tube, which you can see in the photo here. Visual physical assessment. A lot of things going on here. So when we get to a site and it has already presumably been set up, we go ahead and we take the bank height and bank angle. And we do that with, pretend there's 3 of them. I didn't want to haul them from the parking lot. So we have 3 gauge sticks and we use them to get the bank height and the bank angle. I don't know when's the last time you guys have ever seen the protractor. I had to Google it because I forgot. So no shame if you ever come out to the field and you're like, I can't remember how this works. We're more than happy to teach you. So we take bank height, we take bank angle, and from there we take wetted width. And then wetted width, we do the cross-section measurements. So one thing about when we're doing the monitoring is that we have 3 transects. We have a downstream transect, a middle, and an upstream. And we're doing all of this 3 times. So on each transect, once we take wetted width, we go and do cross-section. So left, right, and middle of the stream. And we take stream depth. And so this lovely gauge stick has the measurements in it as well. And after we take those, we pass them off onto the stream bank and we get out these really fun stream viewers. I don't know if you guys have ever used them when you're younger. I didn't know what this was when I started. I thought they were amazing. So these are a good way to look at what is actually in the stream bottom. We take benthic macroinvertebrates. It's a really cool way to be like, hey, we know what their habitat looks like underneath. It's wonderful. So we do that again for the left, the right, and the middle of the stream in each transect. We also look at periphyton. So we take a percentage looking at how big is the periphyton. Is it bigger than 2 centimeters? Is it less than 2 centimeters? Are there none? And we track that as well.
What's periphyton?
So I like to call it the little green, not slimy, but not, it can't be really rooted to the rock and it doesn't have any leaves. So that's how I identify them in the field. And they're just a good indicator also for, is sunlight getting through? Is good oxygen being produced? Is it really gross? So it's just a nice extra indicator. We also take bank characteristics. So when we look down the stream, we want to see, are we just seeing erosion? Is all of this just mud and it's all crumbling into the stream? Or, hey, there's actually some plants that are holding it together. And it's really nice to see. We take some photos as well that we'll go into later. So we can see all the way down the stream, like, hey, over time, over these 5 years plus that we're monitoring, more and more green, hopefully, is getting onto those stream banks and holding it together. Here are our photos. Well, you can see them on that side. So we take a downstream and upstream at the 25% of our reach, of our stream reach that we're monitoring for, the middle, and 75%. So you can see in this chart that we are trying to get a full view. We're not going to fly drones through, so we got to do sort of closer to the ground, front facing of the stream, part of the transects, and then the back sides of the transects. So we're trying to get the full reach. And what's really nice is sometimes I go into the folders and I flick through the years, and you can see some changes, which is kind of cool. Benthics. So this is only done in spring. And we do, well, for right now, we just do a rocky bottom method developed by the CNC. And we don't do any ID in the field, just the visual physical assessment alone, plus the sort of baseline indicators. That usually takes about 3 hours. Benthics adds 4. If we did field ID in there, we'd be there forever. And farmers want us off their land eventually. So we have a pretty easy method with our fun D-net. Someone stands into the stream, dips their hand in. You really hope there's not too much cattle stuff in the stream, but sometimes you don't get lucky. And you reach in to the rocks. If you're doing the rocky bottom method, you scrub the rocks in. All of our fun benthics flow in. And then we put them in a bucket. We put them in a jar. I like to call them pickling, and we just put them in alcohol and send them off to a lab.
What's the frequency of the various monitoring you do?
I'm about to get into that. 1 second. So just a big overall of what does the monitoring fully look like? So 3 transects, downstream, middle, upstream. 3 cross sections, those are the ones in orange, they look kind of yellow on the screen. And then where we take the photos are the green dots. So this is the full amount that we do. It takes 3 to 4 hours, 4 hours if you're doing Bendix. To your question, how often are we doing this? So we are hoping for up to 2 years prior of the installation of whatever restoration you're doing, whether or not, again, that's cattle fencing, whether or not that is the riparian forest buffer, stream restoration, etc. We don't always get that. That's okay. We just at least need 1 monitoring session that is before installation. And so once we do that, we have the post-restoration timeline where we're monitoring spring and fall, the first 2 years. And then once we hit year 3 and 5, my spreadsheet gets a lot more complicated because we start doing once annually, either in spring or fall, depending on when the installation was installed. And then for Benthics, it's in years 3 and 5. So for actual site setup, how do we actually select the sites? So some NFWF grants, you might be super excited to like, yes, we want to go monitor. We have what we believe is the perfect site. And we're like, yes, thank you. Here's 50 projects. This is ideally that we would have to choose from. We do need to make sure that the data that we're collecting, we can collect it safely and that the data will make sense when it comes out. So we do have some selection criteria. It needs to be, the restoration practice needs to be funded by NFWF for now. And it needs to contain a practice that is riparian forest buffer, cattle exclusion, fencing, stream restoration, and also dirt road erosion control. That is not on there. We don't have a site like that quite yet. Project needs to include at least 100 meters of stream receiving treatment. If it's less than that, it's kind of hard to see any impacts. Project needs to be located on a 1 to 3 order perennial stream. We don't want to get to the site and have it be dry. That would make us sad. And it needs to be between 1 and 3 because if it's anything larger, like a 4th order stream, it gets really hard to wade all the way across the stream because we do, again, really go into the streams. Again, we're taking those stream depth measurements, looking into the stream. We don't want to be above our waders. So again, site must be safe, accessible, and wadeable. And then we're not breaking and entering anywhere. So landowners do need to allow us onto their property for at least 5 years. We are asking that sites be in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We're focusing for now on these states, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. The Alliance will mainly be in Virginia and Maryland, and Alarm will be focusing on monitoring the sites and coordinating the sites in Pennsylvania and New York.
Do we pay the landowners?
No, they're getting monitoring for free. So in a way, they get all of our time for free, so like payment. So additional considerations is we would like to have multiple best management practices on. We can just see more changes happen. And I know for riparian forest buffers, and if there's cattle on the farm, cattle fencing must be included with the riparian forest buffers. So yeah, multiple BMPs are fine. We would like to have sites with a smaller upstream area, just because if it's a lot bigger, it's hard to see, are these changes from the site or are they coming up from above the site's watershed? It's really hard as well to tell if our data is coming from the installation or if it's coming from something as big as any dams or bridges. So we don't really want them on the site that we are monitoring for. So with all of this paperwork, we do need to be able to onboard your site if we do see that yes, all of those site criteria I just went through, they do meet site criteria. Next is we need to fill out the project documentation form. And this is really crucial that we do this because it will connect your site to the project, to the co-op. So we don't have to write multiple co-ops. No one wants that. If we're able to see what that looks like. Okay, so project documentation form. So mostly I'll be filling this out, but I will need information from the project managers, from the grantees of that, installation project. So we will definitely need who we are contacting. We'll need the start and end date for the grant. We'll definitely need your signature, and we need the Easy Grants number. This will again help connect the project to the co-op and make sure that data also gets into NFWF's hands as well. We have to have that Easy Grant number, hence why right now you do need to be part of NFWF, this grantee process. So we'll fill a lot of this stuff out. You'll need to give us the landowner name, and almost everything else I will end up filling out. Yep. So this is the entire form. It's nice, short and sweet. I know people think paperwork, it's 10,000 pages. We like to make it short. Next thing that we do, which is also super important, is we don't click out of that yet. Sorry. You're good. Is the landowner packet. Again, we want to make sure that these landowners are on board. They know what's happening. They're interested. It's also really exciting to go to a property and have a landowner be like, hey, how's it looking? It means they're engaged, and they want to see that all this time they spent with working with contractors to get these projects on, that it is doing something. So it is always nice to be like, hey, yes, we will be getting your data very soon. So this is the agreement. It basically says, if you have an electric fence, please turn it off for our safety. We will definitely communicate with you to know, yes, this is when we are coming to your property. This is what we are doing. If any unfortunate thing arises, if we are not actively trying to, to do any damage. So they need a signature, and usually it'll be the project manager, the grantee, that'll give us this form initially, because I won't have any contact with the landowner at first. And then the schedule. So after we have those two pieces of paperwork, I fill out one other form that you don't need to see. Luckily, I just get to do it, so no worries. But that one is just land statistics, what kind of geology is on the site, just some extra information to really help us inform some of the data that we're taking. Finally, we actually get boots in the water and complete a site visit. So we'll go out with usually the project manager or whoever's most in contact with that landowner, and help determine where are we doing this monitoring, because again, it's pre-installation. So when we get out there, we will have no idea, A, where your stream is, or B, where's the installation going. And then we'll work together with the with the project manager to actually monitor. So whether or not that's spring or in fall. So super quick rundown of all the things I was just saying. We will ensure that all the sites meet our criteria. We'll conduct monitoring activities. We will also provide any training for folks who are either part of the organization that is putting in these practices. We'd love for them to come out, or for anyone who's just curious about the program and maybe later on down the line wants to join or branch off and start a very similar monitoring process. So we are happy for you to come on and get trained. We will also store all the data in survey 123. We'll conduct all of the quality assurance, and we will send the data over to NFWF. So these are all the things we're doing. We are doing most of the heavy lifting. So what are we asking from you guys? We don't know what grants you guys have. So if you have some coming down the pipeline that have already been approved, or even ones that have been approved several years ago, but you're still waiting for that installation to happen, we're happy to set up a time to chat to make sure that that the site meets all of the requirements. We'll need again to provide the easy grant number. Again, we won't have the initial relationship with the landowner, so you'll have to talk to them, get them on board. Again, attend an initial site visit, and please update us when the installation is actually in the ground so that we know to switch from installation monitoring to post-installation monitoring, or any other major updates. Like we once went out and there was just suddenly a road in the stream. I'm like, oh, that's different. So let us know beforehand before that happens, so we're not surprised. Please join us. We'd love for you to come out. We have some extra waiters if you don't have your own, and learn some of the protocol. Again, all of the equipment is super easy to use. We're not asking you to like read monitors and scary stuff like that. So monitoring occurs between March and May in the spring, and in fall, September, in October. We also do some in August as well. We will provide all of the equipment, the oversight, the training, and it's always great to have an extra set of hands. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff, even if it's not super complicated. We do need at least 3 people if it's like a pretty big stream, like the second, third order, to come out and help. One person cannot do it alone. So, super quick rundown. If you have a project, review your grants. Let us know if you think it might hit some of these criteria. Contact either myself, if you have a Maryland or Virginia site. Please contact either, well, Phoebe won't be here anymore, but Alarm will take on sites from New York or Pennsylvania. There is the, in that email, identify yourself, what organization you're from. I need your easy grant number, the practice that you are installing, the location of it. Again, it's going to help me fill out some of that background paperwork, and we can just go ahead and get started. So here is who to reach out to. So our new person is Jill from Alarm, who will be taking on onboarding sites in New York and Pennsylvania. If you're interested, or you think you have sites, or you just want to learn more about the program, feel free to fill out an interest form. My work cards are on here with all my information on as well if you want to take some. And for those of you who don't have phones that have QR codes, I don't know, my phone doesn't always do that on my work phone. I don't know why. You can also just write your name down on the board right here, and I will reach out to you in the next few weeks. And that is it.
Yeah. Sorry, I am a data scientist and a researcher professionally, so I have some specific questions, but that may or may not be appropriate, but so apologies. But it's like 2 things. I think it's related to the question that people were talking about earlier in terms of like lots of people are collecting a lot of data, and I feel like I know so many organizations who have been collecting a lot of data for a long time, and no actual research is getting done, or no like real things. And I'm wondering for this, like, are y'all doing A/B testing? Are you doing like any other stuff, or is this more what's the goal of collecting all of this data, like in terms of like the next step?
I think it's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer on it, to be quite honest with you. I think the point, I mean, there's clearly the use of this, which is about being able to track and characterize, and a little bit of what Liz was talking about. I mean, at the very least, storytelling, anecdotal stuff of being able to see sort of, discrete changes associated with a specific project, those kinds of things. However, there is certainly potential, and I think part of that is limited just based on the number of sites that we currently have right now, and just the number of data points. It just limits the statistical power, right, of what we're talking about. But we don't quite know where this is going to go. I think that the idea, the hope, is that this does expand to more sites, that as we bring more sites on, as the volume of data starts to increase, the research value of that data starts to really sort of show itself a little bit. So I think just being honest, like we are not at the stage yet of actually having discrete research products or analyses like lined up. We are just focused right now on getting the data.
Yeah.
And then that will inform sort of our.
I live in a land of like, I'm nervous that we're collecting all this data, and
Yeah.
then at some point, we're not gonna be able to do real testing on it.
No, for
because
sure.
we're not doing AB, or we're not doing these other like building a database that we can actually do.
Yes, and I'll just say quickly on that too. So someone who's not here, but has been involved at various points in the process is we have our own data scientists at NFWF, and so they're very much sort of a part of this and have been reviewing the protocols and those kinds. So they have their own, honestly, if he was here, he might have a better answer for you on some of that.
I mean, part of what Liz said in the beginning is getting those initial eyes on when you actually install practice, you don't just walk away, which can happen, to a lot of projects, especially, once you hit 3 years, even like a year later, you might pop by and see if it's still there. So just those little checks can also just be really informative. And since we go out twice a year, at least in the first 2 years, and then more every other season, it's getting those eyes on, informing the landowner, informing the project manager. Hey, half your fence got knocked down. You should probably go check on that. That's also really important.
One more comment on this too is that, again, like part of the challenge of using different data sets is when things are collected differently on different frequencies, there's different parameters. So again, the thing that we're trying to do is create the consistency across each of these sites that we're monitoring. So at least down the road, we know that between these sites, we have certain data sets, we know how to analyze that data and can do it in a collective way. And if there are other data sets that match that and can supplement that, we'll for sure. So I think you had your hand up first.
I have two questions. One is for things like water temperature and clarity. How do you, if you're only sampling once or twice a year, how do you use those in terms of evaluating long-term monitoring? Because you can go out to a stream, and through the streams we work on, they're going to be all over the place depending on the particular day that you go out and do it. That's my first question. Second question is, are you or NFWF doing anything similar for more downwater urban streams? Because this seems to be focused a lot on rural agricultural areas.
The water temperature question is a great one. We debated a lot about putting in data loggers and tracking, the diurnal changes in water temperature over time. And to be honest, that is the better data set in this case. The capacity to maintain the data loggers on those properties and get people out in enough frequency to actually maintain them wasn't realistic for us. So you can see the changes. What we're trying to do is at least keep it somewhat consistent in the time of day that we're taking the data. We are tracking the cloud cover conditions, the sun, all of that too, so we can at least see if there are any differences. But over the long term, over 5-10 years, we're hoping to at least see some trends in temperature on the larger scale that we're looking at instead of kind of the monthly changes over time.
Also, again, because we're going to have a lot of the sites we're looking at have riparian forest buffer. So as the canopy cover comes up, there's a couple sites that they got no trees. It's kind of sad. And as canopy cover slowly, as these trees eventually get big enough in 20 years, and they leaf out, you're going to see those temperatures dropping in stream. So that is something that at least you can be yes, canopy cover, and you already know they'll drop the stream temperature, but it's nice to just have, hey, there's that long-term data set there.
I mean, I appreciate the question because I think it speaks a little bit to this sort of latent potential on sort of partnerships, or to the extent that you or other organizations are collecting some of those more physical sort of water quality criterion sort of parameters on a more frequent basis, right? That is a potential, like a supplemental data set that I think really can sort of really help further contextualize and sort of increase the power of what we're doing. Also, just an opportunity to clarify that really at the end of the day, where I think we asked these folks to focus was much more on the biological and habitat parameters here and less on those physical and sort of water chemistry parameters for a variety of reasons, one of which, I mean, we're the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Ultimately for us and my accountability is relating all this not to DO, not to turbidity, but really like specific habitat improvements, right? And so that's sort of why we asked them to focus. I think a happy outcome was also, I think that has just been, there's been less collective emphasis there, right? I think there has been a lot of emphasis for good reason on, you know, those more physical sort of parameters of water quality, less on sort of the habitat and the biologics. And so to your question, in terms of urban systems, it's again, a perfectly good question. I think what we did with the sort of the charge and some of the initial discussions that we have with these folks was, quite honestly, we wanted to build something that was going to give us the greatest likelihood of being able to actually measure a positive change. And so that is one of the reasons why I think we ultimately ended up focusing on more of these rural catchments. I think there's the waitability piece about like stream order. I think another piece of that is just that if we're trying to relate, if we're doing a buffer on a fifth order stream, I don't know that we're really going to be able to make any discernible connection between a 200-meter buffer on that stream and the entire huge watershed that contributes to that point. So we were intentional about sort of scaling and focusing here. Not to say that there isn't applicability for this, and that I don't think that like over the long term we want to be able to like translate what we're trying to do here into different landscapes and different situations. But I think it's fair to say that like we built this and focused this not on those urban systems yet, I guess is sort of the answer to it. And there's intentionality about it.
So I know that you guys are aware that there's a lot of controversy on whether stream restorations actually improve the BB scores of the stream or not. Okay. So is one of your intentions on this is to help inform people on what type of stream restoration? Do you have that in that model too? What type of stream restorations? Let's say we, bulldoze it and put, this in, or, I mean, there's lots of different types of stream restoration to inform people on which ones might give you a better BB score or? Sure.
Yeah. So NFWF steers very clear of the controversy in terms of like any position or anything like that. However, to your point, but to your point, we are absolutely theoretically collecting very valuable data, right? That could sort of inform future decision making, future policy decisions on that. That is not our intention. It's happening. And also like, so sort of the contextual data that this team walks onto the site with is what are the practices? Like what are the interventions that NFWF has funded? And so they will walk onto a site and we have connected with those monitoring data points. What is the restoration activity that's happening? So we know if it's a stream restoration versus a buffer or both. We further know sort of, we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but like what protocol, what level of stream restoration? We're not necessarily making the distinction per se in terms of like a natural channel design versus a legacy sediment project. But ultimately, we know where the projects are. There are other ways to get that information. So all to say, data is being collected, certainly could have utility. That is not our intended purpose at this point, but down the road, absolutely, it's data that could be very valuable in future, discussions. Sorry.
Yeah, we have a participant in the virtually that wants to come off mute and ask a question.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so great presentation, everybody. So I understand that your interest is in collecting data to determine whether or not these types of projects work. I'm wondering what you would say to someone who says, well, we already have so much data, and I'm particularly thinking about Margaret Palmer's and her group's paper that analyzed over 600 projects, and then Robert Hildebrand, and I'm sure you guys, the scientists among you all have heard of these, Robert Hildebrand's group looked at over 40 different stream restorations, and their conclusions were that these projects don't improve the ecology, they don't improve the water quality or the stream. And Palmer in particular said that the stream stability improvement was maybe seen in only about less than half of the project. So, so what do you say to people that says, well, there's nothing wrong with more data, that's great, but don't we already have enough data to reach a conclusion as to whether or not stream restorations work and should be funded in the future? I mean, you're talking about, tens of millions of dollars being used for these projects. So thank you.
This is a feisty group today. I appreciate it. And so I think, so again, there's a very explicit connection.
All right, can you hear now?
Can you hear? Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, got an affirmation. Stream restoration, there's a lot of controversy around it. There is difference of opinion in terms of the actual effects of stream restoration, which is a very discrete, defined activity that we're talking about here, right? NFWF doesn't take an opinion on it, really. We don't get involved in that. I think what's important to know is that that is still, like it or not, depending on where you sit, that is still an eligible, creditable practice consistent with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. So NFWF is not in any position to say we don't want to fund that or we disagree with it, right? Our money is accountable. We're trying to contribute to what everyone is trying to do here. And so that is a part of our portfolio, right? However, we're collecting data that is valuable in some theoretical, future, ongoing, real, not theoretical discussion and debate around the value of those kind of practices. So we're collecting data, I don't, and it may further validate some of those papers and some of those academics and experts that you talked about. Maybe it provides an alternative story. I don't know, right? I will say that if I had to choose, just personally, and I'm gonna like explode the group here maybe, but if I had to choose, like, I would much rather just plant 100-foot of buffer and walk away for 30 years than pull some heavy equipment into a stream channel. That's just my personal preference. So maybe that's speaking a little bit to sort of what you're talking about here. But again, at the end of the day, stream restoration is a thing. It's a major strategy for a lot of folks in this effort. And so it's going to still continue to be something that we want. So.
I just want to add to that real quick. Again, like the goal of this monitoring is to tell the story on a site. There's much more beyond just the benthic macroinvertebrate community, which is why we're looking at the riparian buffer. We're looking at the banks. There's a lot that happens on site after a restoration project. And the benthic community is one small, albeit a great indicator for the recovery of that system. It is one component, and what we're looking at is trying to tell the whole story. So you look at all of the benefits, all of the different kinds of benefits that occur on site. And again, our goal is not to debate stream restorations or, track that practice in particular. It's to tell the story of what's happening on site. So we are at time. We'll stick around if y'all want to ask any more questions. Happy to have continued conversation, but I don't want to keep everybody.
It was like so funny. I felt a little bit bad.